Dayton Disneyana, round of applause and welcome for Mr. Mark Silverman!
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk into this fake microphone that's right here. It doesn't matter, but it makes me feel more natural because it's right here. I want to say that it's great to be here in Ohio because the last time I was here, this is no, not kidding, I was 14 and I was actually visiting my father in prison in Ohio. But it wasn't that bad because the warden was Robert Redford. My father was actually a movie producer filming at an old abandoned prison. And does anybody know what the movie was where Robert Redford played a warden?
Brubaker.
Yeah, yes.
There you go.
Brubaker. So I got to spend a lot of time in this prison watching Redford be a warden. And spending that time, I knew I didn't want to go to jail because it was a terrible place. So don't ever do anything to get there. Now, believe me, I've been a Disney fanatic my whole life. I'm as nuts as all of you are. And I'm going to tell you how a Disney fanatic became the voice of one of the biggest attractions in Walt Disney World. You know, there's a map somebody's selling out there, like a giant poster from Disneyland, 1978. And I had this thing, and I spent an entire summer with glow-in-the-dark paint and a toothpick. And I dabbed each lamppost with a glow-in-the-dark paint, and I went through every building, on the outsides of every building on Main Street. I did the Matterhorn, and then when you turn the light off, it was Disneyland After Dark. And I really went the extra mile on that. In fact, I may buy it again and get
recreate it, recreate your youth.
And recreate my crazy room. I had a talking skull I made that was an exact copy from Pirates of the Caribbean. And it had a string to move the jaw. And I could lay in bed and move the jaw, and I would lie there and have conversations with this talking skull. I mean, I had water from Pirates of the Caribbean that I took from the ride. They probably frown upon that, so maybe you should never do that. I brought a plastic bottle and I hid it under my coat, and I put it into the blue bag as soon as we got on the boat. And every now and then, but I really wanted a Disneyland fix. I would smell the water, and it smelled exactly like the ride. You know, and they thought it was nuts, but I had a reason for doing this stuff. About when I was 14, I thought it would be interesting to bring a tape recorder into Disneyland and record all the various rides and attractions. And I knew there wasn't a sound in Disneyland that I didn't already know. I memorized every single pirate speech, like this one from Disneyland. Dead men tell no tales.
Perhaps you knows too much. You've seen the cursed treasure. You know where it be hidden. Now proceed at your own risk. These be the last friendly words you hear. You may not survive to pass this way again.
Every single line I knew.
Howdy, folks. Welcome aboard the Disney World Railroad. We'll be making a grand circle trip around Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom with brief stops at Tomorrowland, Adventureland, and Mickey's Toontown Fair. For your safety, please keep your hands and arms inside the train. And parents, watch your children, please.
This was from the Disney World Railroad. So I had tapes of every single sound. And somehow I wanted to do something for Disney, and I was a cartoonist at the same time, and I wanted to be an animator. So I would call animators, I would look them up in the phone book and just call these guys because their names would be in there. And they were so nice, and I was such a nervy kid, I can't believe they just didn't hang up on me. Like they would answer the phone like some 80-year-old man, hello? Hi, is this Wooly Riverman who animated Monstro and Pinocchio?
Why, yes it is.
Can you tell me something about them? And he wouldn't say like, well, how'd you get this number? He'd just say, sure, Walt wanted Monstro. and I would just sit on the phone and listen to all these guys. And then there was this restaurant in Burbank called Alphonse's, where all the animators would sit there and eat. And somehow I got to sit there and eat with them. And I had lunch with a guy named Eric Larson, who animated Figaro and Pinocchio. And nobody told me to get out, or they just sat there and they would talk, and they were all in their 80s, and they were still so sharp. It made me want to be an old man when I was 14. So then I started to call Imagineering, and I would ask them, they would always send one particular guy named Tom Fitzgerald. I think he was painting Figment models at the time. He was like 22 or something. And he would come to the phone, and he always was very nice. And I had like 50 different pirate questions every time I would call him. How tall's the sky? How deep's the water? How tall's the auctioneer? Does the sand blow off the island, or do they glue it all there, you know? And he was so nice, but by about the third month in, when I would call, he'd come to the phone and say, "Yes, Mr. Pirates of the Caribbean, what can I do for you now?" So I started to think I was annoying them, but I would say, "Can I come into Imagineering and just have a tour?" "We don't really do that, I'm sorry." And I just wanted to get in there somehow. So then when I became about 25, I started to get hired a lot. Not from Disney, but I became a very good mimic. I could sound like people. And Universal Studios hired me when I became a little older to revoice 80 lines for Al Pacino. And I'll tell you why. If you ever see like a broadcast movie on network TV, but there's a lot of bad language, you can't really say bad words on network TV. So they get the stars of the movies to come in and say more television appropriate words. So the one time they couldn't get Al Pacino back, they hired me. And I went, so if you ever see Carlito's Way on TV and he doesn't cuss, it's because of me. There's a scene in that movie where he takes a gun from Sean Penn and he says,
You are going to wave that thing at the wrong people. They're going to take it from you and bury it up your nose, guaranteed.
But he's not saying nose. There's another scene in the movie where he says,
Dave, you a lawyer, man. What the heck is happening to you?
but he's not saying heck. And in the movie, for some reason, you'll see he keeps saying,
Forget you. Forget you.
but he's not saying forget. But you gotta say forget really fast to get that one syllable, you know. So you don't really see his mouth going, you know. But if you don't know what's coming, you buy it a little easier. So I started to get hired revoicing a lot of people. Then, about 1993, I got a call from an old family friend named Sam Quasman. Sam, incidentally, was the voice of Donald Duck for Disney on Parade. He'd stand there backstage with a microphone, blabbing as Donald Duck, as Donald would dance around the stage and all that. And he did a popsicle ad as Donald Duck, so he wanted to be Donald Duck. So he gets a call from his agent saying they want a Rod Serling voice for a Disney attraction in Walt Disney World. And he didn't do that, he didn't have that range, so he called me to see if I could do it. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll try. The thing about Rod Serling was, it wasn't a stretch for me. Whereas if I'm doing Maxwell Smart, like, would you believe this is Maxwell Smart 1886 of Control? That isn't really like my voice. But Rod Serling, I could just sort of say like, hi, I'm Mark Silverman, hi, I'm Rod Serling with the Twilight. So I can go in and out of it like that. You were the passengers in a most uncommon elevator, about to be sent in the Twilight Zone. In just a moment, this elevator door will open to another dimension. So I started to say, wow, maybe I'll get this thing. So I went into this audition, and it was this agent's first day on the job. She had like a big ghetto blaster with a microphone. It wasn't even a recording studio. So I said, all right, let me try it. And I do this spiel. It was, you unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of mind. You're traveling through another dimension into the Twilight Zone. And I didn't think much of it. But about 2 weeks later, this woman called back and said, you know what? That Rod Serling thing you did, it didn't die. I actually still have the message on it. He says, they want to see you at Walt Disney Imagineering. And I didn't even think about the job. I just said, wow, we're going to get into the building now. So she says, it's at a place called Imagineering. And I said, oh my God, I felt like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. I was going to get into this place. So I got all excited, and I got into Imagineering, and they're walking me through the hallway to the recording studio, and everywhere I look, there's like models and pictures from Pirates of the Caribbean on the wall, and pictures of Lincoln, and I can't look anybody in the eye because there's too much to see, you know. So I get into the recording studio, and I do the whole thing. You were the passengers in a most uncommon elevator. And I come home, and the casting lady calls, and she says, they really liked you, you know. And there was like 100 people up for this thing. And every time I would go back to audition, it would get smaller and smaller. And then it becomes the last audition, there was one other guy. Why they needed another guy, I don't know. But I remember walking to the recording studio feeling like Rocky gonna fight Apollo, you know? I walked through those narrow corridors and I got in and I read the whole thing as Rod Serling. And then when I got back to the waiting room, she said, "You got it." And I thought, wow. I mean, it was an amazing thing. But at the same time, I had no idea what the scope of this ride was. So I go in to record a few months later, but I got a cold. And I didn't know what to do because I had sort of laryngitis. So my mom at the time read on, there was some kind of soup to make with onions and garlic and stuff, and you throw in like 10 onions, and that would help you. And I called Imagineering and said, "I'm kind of sick, I don't know what to do." They said, "Oh, just come in." And I read one line like, "You are the passengers and almost didn't come in." It didn't work. So they said, "You better go home." So about a month later, I went back even stronger than before. And when I was practicing for this thing, everything I did was Rod Serling. If I was sitting in my car and somebody would cross the street, like a businessman, I would just say, "Mr. Harry Dilbert, he's 47 years old. He's about to find himself in a business meeting in another dimension." I would just make up these weird things about everybody because that's all I did. I wanted to be Rod Serling. So Rod Serling smoked a lot, so I bought these bubblegum cigarettes and went into Imagineering to really get into the character. And I read the whole thing, then there was a break, and for some reason Imagineering made the greatest mashed potatoes. I don't know why, and that has nothing to do with the story, but they were so creamy like. I don't know, they had like a special Imagineering secret or something. They've never told me what they did, but I'm curious. So after that, finally there was a big premiere for this attraction, and I went to Disney World and I had my tape recorder with me, and there was this big red carpet thing, and there were celebrities and people and media from all over the world, and I got in line to ride this thing, and the ride was so huge, and I'm sitting there with my tape recorder thinking I'm going to be recording my own voice. This is just too weird. So I get into the lobby of the Hollywood Tower Hotel, and I was so amazed that Disney thought enough of me to put my voice into this beautiful place. And then when I got on the ride and heard my voice, it was the most surreal moment of my life. It really was. I mean, I'm amazed I didn't pass out just from the bizarre excitement of it all. But to hear your voice booming back on a ride is something, I'll never forget it. So I wrote about 10 times that night at the premiere. And I saw that this thing became very popular. Like a week later, I was at home in bed like at 3 in the morning, and I put on C-SPAN. Hillary Clinton's talking about riding the Tower of Terror, and I thought, wow, this is so weird. And I thought of all the famous people around the world that go on this thing. So just that alone was satisfying enough. But then what was really great is when I would go back to the Tower of Terror, I'd go after midnight when the parks were closed, and the cast members were nice enough to let me on all alone in my own elevator when there was no one in the park. And if you think that thing's creepy, when there's an elevator with people, imagine going on at 12:30 at night in the pitch blackness, nobody's in the park, and you're there alone in your own elevator, and none of the cast members are really watching on the monitor. It really is something. I didn't like doing it that much, but it really was one of the freakiest feelings I ever had. And at that time, it had lap bars, so you flew off the seat more. So if you were a little skinny kid and you had a big person next to you, you'd fly off the seat more. But now they strap you in there to make sure you don't fly out of the thing. It's actually, I'd like to ride that thing with no seatbelt, see what would happen. What would happen? Would you just fly to the top, you think?
Yeah, because it is pulled down faster than gravity. And so, yes, you would float a little bit.
They got handlebars.
Really,
That's why they got handlebars.
You have to wear a helmet. But I got to do other great Disney things. Like through that, I would find that they invited me to go see Walt's apartment in Disneyland above the fire station. I couldn't believe I was up there. And I brought this girl that I was crazy about, and she loved Disney. And she kind of dumped me about 2 months after that. Now every time I walk by that apartment, I think of her and I get a stomachache. I always wonder what she thinks when she walks by there. I don't know why I told you such a depressing little part of that story. But some of my other Disney jobs, which I really love, is well, one of the weirdest jobs was, speaking of revoicing people, was there's a Disney movie called The Happiest Millionaire with Fred MacMurray, an old 1967 musical. And someone in the Disney restoration crew found the last 2 scenes of the movie with no audio track. So they needed to hire somebody to come back and be the voice of Fred MacMurray. Now, I was such a weird kid that I watched My 3 Sons a lot.
And I always did a Fred MacMurray impression and knew how to talk like Fred MacMurray. Chip, Bobby, and Ernie.
And I knew nobody else did that. So I auditioned for it, and it's very difficult to get voice work in Los Angeles. But I knew I was going to get this. And then 2 days later, they called me and said, "I want you to be Fred MacMurray for Disney." So I went down there, and of course I wore this corny blue sweater, and I had a fake little pipe,
And all of a sudden I became Fred MacMurray.
and I made up a line to get me into the mood, and I kept saying this for 24 hours a day before the job. And that line was,
I'm Fred MacMurray and I've invented Flubber, along with Chip, Bobby, and Ernie, and Uncle Charlie.
now, the way to do Fred MacMurray, the way I say Uncle Charlie, for instance, it doesn't even have the last syllable in it. It's just all breath.
Uncle Charlie, Uncle Charlie. Chip, Bobby, and Ernie, Uncle Charlie.
It'll never come in handy ever again. So unless they made a Flubber ride,
Look how high we are, Mike. Look down there,
but I don't think they would do that because they'd probably make an upright if they were going to make something fly around. But if you ever see The Happiest Millionaire, the last 2 scenes in the movie,
I'm the voice of Fred MacMurray.
and you'll remember that. But one of the other good things is, whenever they do a Bambi project, I'm the voice of Friend Owl. And I really like that one because the voice of Friend Owl in the original Bambi was a character actor named Will Wright, who was in a lot of I Love Lucy's, and he played a sheriff in I Love Lucy, and a very cantankerous man on the Andy Griffith program, And there's nothing, it was so satisfying to be a kid doing voices in your room in your tape recorder, and Disney casts you as one of their classical Disney characters. Matter of fact, when I got off the elevator to Disney character voices in Burbank, there's a big giant mural on the wall of Mickey holding a script, talking into a microphone. And I stood there for 10 minutes just looking at that. I couldn't believe that I had in some way got into this whole thing. It was just amazing beyond belief. But this is just a little part of what it's like to be a Disney fanatic and become the voice of a major Disney attraction. And I think that'll do it for me. Now you'll have something to think about next time you go on the Tower of Terror.
Yes.
You'll remember this whole story and understand and think of Fred MacMurray.
Fred MacMurray on the Tower of Terror. First, we're going to pull this down because you notice that Mark has the tendency to lean it, even if it's not there. And those of you who are videotaping this, I always like to start with the disclaimer that when you're watching this and you're showing this to friends, if I do not look like a young George Clooney, there's something wrong with your equipment. You need to take it back to the Best Buy immediately and take care of that. Mark is just fantastic. Wonderful stories. He has a lot more. Remember questions to ask him, because when I finish with the hot air that I'm going to be spewing, questions for him. One of the questions I have is, what is the answer that Tom Fitzgerald gave you? Does the sand go off into the thing, or is it glued on there, or whatever? And do you notice how Mark made it look seamless? Voice acting is very competitive, is very difficult. Those of you who have ever thought, oh, I can do voices, and my friends all think that I'm funny, there's a book out there that I usually recommend called Word of Mouth by Susan Blue, B-L-U. And she's also a casting agent, so if you're doing that. And there are voice placements that you learn and all of that. But doing voices is not just doing a funny voice or not just doing a sound alike and mimicking. It really is acting. And you could see that. I'm sitting over there. I could see Mark doing that. And when he slips into Rod Serling, notice that his entire body changes. Sometimes it's very subtle, but it's there. And then when he goes into the Will Wright voice and all that, and I would recommend that after you listen to us and you're so amazed do not be so amazed that you forget to go into the dealer's room, and Mark is offering a CD of some of the voices that he does, and he also has the Bambi Storyteller album where he does Friend Owl. And this is a great chance to get this autograph. Not only that, but it's a great chance to pick up some wonderful gifts for friends and family. Because how many people are ever going to see Mark Silverman, right?
And I got some of my best prank phone calls on the CD too.
There you go. we won't bring up the Howard Stern story and all of that. You'll have to ask him about that in questions and answers.
All that stuff is on there. Loads of laughter.
Okay. So my name is Jim Korkis, which usually generates who cares. And I get that. I get that. As you might have suspected, besides being a Disney historian, I have an entertainment background. I'm a professional magician. All of these things were to impress women. They were completely unimpressed, and so I became a Disney historian. I grew up in Glendale, California, which is right next to Burbank, where the Disney studios are. And so as a kid, just like Mark here, I would watch the Disney television show, and I would copy down the names, and then I would go to the Glendale Burbank phone book and phone these guys up. I was about 11, 12 years old, you know. How do you make that move? And most of them were very generous and talking to me. About 85% were really nice. The other 15% thought it was just a gag, that, you know, their friends had set up some kid to call them and ask all these questions for all of that. And so even as early as junior high, I started writing down some of these things that animators and Imagineers had told me, and eventually that led to writing for the local newspaper and then for magazines, and it just spiraled out of control from there. And then unfortunately, I lived long enough that I lived past all of these other people, and so I felt I had the real obligation to come and share the stories that I had heard from them, because so that the stories do not die. I have never been to Dayton, Ohio before in my life. I did not realize when I came that the weather was out to kill me. I came in on Thursday and it's 102 degrees, and I'm from Florida, so I'm used to heat. 102 degrees? Get out of here, all right? And then the next day you got a storm okay, forget that. But what I wanted to do, especially for Dayton Disneyana, is to come up with something very special for you. And again, I have a lot of standard stories that I pull out so that people are, oh, that's so interesting, that's so impressive. But I wanted to bring today a special story, and tomorrow Mark and I get to talk again too, and we'll be telling different things, because there's more to our life than all of this. I wanted to bring a special story that I hadn't told for a group before. I was a guest speaker at the Disney Family Museum last July, talking about Walt and his fascination with outer space. So if you want to talk to me afterwards or ask questions about Walt and UFOs and all that, I've got some answers. But I met his daughter, Diane Disney Miller, and she shared a wonderful story with me that I would like to share with you. This is the time period where Walt was a young boy living in Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri. And between the ages of 8 and 13, he was a newspaper boy. His father, Elias, had purchased a distributorship in Kansas City. So he owned a certain section of Kansas City, and he then would hire newspaper boys to deliver newspapers. And in those days, there was both a morning edition and an afternoon edition. And he would pay the newspaper boys $2.50 a week. Walt and Roy were both newspaper boys. They did not get paid anything. Elias said, "You're my sons. I give you clothes. I feed you. I put a roof over your head. You're already being paid. That's it." So in order for Walt to earn any money as a kid, he had to do odd jobs. So sometimes he would deliver prescriptions for the local drugstore. Sometimes, without his dad knowing, he would order extra newspapers and then sell those extra newspapers. At lunch, he often had to run right across the street to the local store where he would sweep out in exchange for getting a hot meal, because the Disney family was not very well off. In fact, the very famous story, of course, was that Walt's mother, Flora, made wonderful butter, and Elias forbade her to use that butter in the house because that butter could be sold to neighbors and people like that. And what Flora would do is, when she gave toast to Walt and to Roy, she would butter it underneath so that Elias would not see it as that went, that they were getting a little butter on their toast there. So Walt was a newsboy for 6 years. During those 6 years, he was only sick or out from doing it for 4 weeks total over six years. So every single day, this includes Sundays, he would do this. Now Walt was a very slight boy, very small boy. Even when he was full grown, he was barely about 5'9". He'd tell people he was 5'10". And when he was standing next to people like Buddy Ebsen and Fess Parker, who were 6'2" and 6'5", he would literally get an apple box and put it and stand so that when he took the picture, he was almost shoulder to shoulder with these two guys. He was a slight boy carrying the sack of newspapers. It weighed almost about 40 pounds. It was very, very heavy. And so he would have to deliver to apartment things, so he would have to go up steps to 3 levels to deliver the papers, all that. His father insisted, because his father wanted this business to be a success, that the paper be delivered without wrinkles, it not be thrown on the porch, that it had to be, you know, laid out nice, that if it was bad weather, you had to put it in the storm door between, you know, the regular door and outside, so that it wouldn't be laying out there in the weather. And so Walt struggled with this, and especially during Kansas City winters. It would get freezing cold, there'd be snow, and this little kid dragging this 40-pound sack, and he said he would climb up the steps, and sometimes he would lose his footing and he would slip and he would fall all the way back down to the ground. And he said sometimes he would just cry, and he would cry because he could cry. You know, it was cold and he was alone and it was dark, because he had to get up every morning, every day for 6 years, 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, he'd start to get dressed, he'd sit on the edge of the bed, he'd be tying his shoes, and he'd drop off to sleep, and his father would yell, "Walter!" and he'd wake up and he'd have to rush and do this. And as he went out, as I said, it was a poor family, sometimes he would go and he would deliver to well-to-do areas in Kansas City. Sometimes he would find on the lawn that there were toys. And sometimes he would take a few minutes to pick up the toy and play with the toy, and then very carefully place it exactly back where he had found it. One time he saw on a porch that there was a train set. And there was also half-eaten candy, you know, where people take the candy and take a bite and go, "I don't want that one." You know, you never know what you're going to get when you get into a box of chocolates, right? I don't want that, unless you read the cover, you know, where they tell you, you know, this shaped chocolate is this. So what he did is he ate some of the half-eaten chocolates and played with the train, and then he had to rush, you know, to catch up so that he could get to school on time. And then he had all that school, and then at lunch he had to rush across the street to sweep out the store, then he had to go back for classes, and then at the end, with the 3 o'clock bell, he couldn't go out and play with his friends because there was the afternoon edition of the paper to be delivered. So he had to go get that and deliver that, and then come home and do the homework and just collapse, and 3 o'clock in the morning it starts all over again. Well, one Christmas, when he was about 13 years old, he saw all of his friends had these new boots. I don't know if any of you have children or nieces or nephews or things like that, but you know sometimes it's very important to have the same clothes as everybody else, you know, in your class has and all this. And so Walt wanted those boots. So he went to his dad and he said, Well, you know, Dad, in a practical manner, you know, if I have those boots, it'll give me more traction through the snow, you know, and it'll give me more support and all. But Dad wasn't buying any of this. And Walt kept, you know, could we please get this? Could we please get this? And Walt's birthday was December 5th. I don't know if you or any of your friends have a birthday in December, but sometimes parents play that gag on you of, oh, well, your birthday's in December and Christmas is in December. We'll just get you something really big for Christmas. You know, that's what we'll celebrate. We won't celebrate your birthday. And so they played that on Walt all the time. So Walt's birthday came December 5th, and he didn't get anything, and he really wasn't expecting anything. And there at Christmas, he realized, well, you know, my parents never get me toys, all this. They get me something practical like underwear or, you know, or some jeans or something like that. But underneath the Christmas tree that year was a big box. What had happened is his mom, Flora, had set aside a couple of pennies each week from the housekeeping budget. His brother, Roy, had picked up another little job to get the money, and the two of them together had gotten enough money to get Walt these boots. These high leather boots, and they had straps, and they were all embroidered, and all this. And Walt opened those up on Christmas Day, immediately put them on, immediately ran down to the drugstore so he could lean up against the wall and kick out his feet so that people could see the boots. These are my boots. Look at the boots. See? Oh, yes, I happen to have gotten boots. Did you see those? Yes. Well, he spent the rest of the day there. As it was getting to be about 5:30, 6 o'clock, time to come home, he decided to walk home. And it was a warm winter, so some of the ice had already started to melt. So again, he's a 13-year-old kid. What he decides to do is he decides to kick blocks of ice that he sees on the street. And Walt, being the creative guy that he is, it's like, well, if I kick this here, you know, can it carom off there and spin this way? And can I send it right underneath this horse there and all this? And so he's going and he's kicking these, and these are magnificent boots, boy. You can't even feel it when you kick this block of ice and it goes skidding. And right in front of him, right by the side of the road there's this big, huge block of ice. And so he pulls back his foot and he kicks. And he's stuck. He can't move his foot. And inside that block of ice was a big, rusty horseshoe nail. And it had gone right through his boot into his foot. And it was at such an angle he could not put any weight on the foot because it was stuck so tightly it caused pain. And so he started to yell out. He started, help, help, I'm stuck. And in the distance, he saw a streetcar, and he was waving his hands, and he was yelling, help, help, and nobody was paying attention. And across the street, a couple of people were walking, help, help, help me. They thought it was just a kid playing a prank, playing a joke. And Walt said he was stuck there for about 25 minutes. Whether he was or not, it certainly seemed like 25 minutes to Walt. And a horse-drawn delivery cart came up, and the driver looked, and Walt said, please, I'm stuck, please help me. And the guy moved on. And then he stopped, and he looked back, and he goes, are you kidding me? Are you playing a joke? And Walt's tears are coming down his eyes. He goes, no, I'm stuck, I'm stuck. And so the guy gets out, takes a look, pulls out a tool from the wagon, chops around the ice, picks up Walt, because Walt can't walk, picks up this slight boy, walks him down to the end of the corner, takes him into the doctor up on the second floor. The doctor says, well, kid, you know, there's nothing I can give you. You're just going to have to hang on. And so he had the delivery guy hold down Walt, brought in somebody else to hold Walt on the other side, got these big, huge pliers, had to dig into the foot and twist and pull out, then had to clean out the cut, give a tetanus shot. But for Walt, the worst part of the story is in order for that to happen, he had to cut off the boot. The boot was completely ruined. Walt realized he would never get a pair of boots like that ever again in his entire life. He felt stupid and foolish. You know, when you do something like that, you go, what was I thinking? Why was I kicking that? Why didn't I just leave well enough alone? Why did all of this? He was literally in tears. And what made it even worse is his dad had to come pick him up, and the dad had to pay the doctor. And that was money that the Disney family really did not have set aside. And to make it even worse, the leg was so bad it had to be elevated for 2 weeks. So Walt could not go to school, Walt could not deliver newspapers. So he laid on the couch in the living room with his foot elevated. There's no radio. Remember, this is 1913, 1914. No radio, no phonograph, no TV, no Xbox, nothing there, no Angry Birds for Walt to play. Walt had been given by his Aunt Margaret this pad of, this little notebook pad with paper in it. Those of you of a certain age know what I'm going to be talking about. It's one step above wood pulp. You can literally see within the paper itself little bits of wood and all of that, and this sort of dull pencil. And so Walt would spend the day drawing and drawing cartoons. In the afternoon, his mom would walk to the school to get his homework, bring it home for him to do, and then in the morning she would walk back to school to deliver the homework so he didn't get behind, because Walt was not a good student at all. But Walt would draw these cartoons, and she would take the cartoons with her, and there was a barber shop along the way. And she would hand those off, and the guy loved them so much he posted them in the windows. And she also gave them to Walt's friends at school, and would come back and tell Walt to lift his spirits. My gosh, they laughed so much at that cartoon you drew. They thought this was so funny. When are you going to do the next one? And it was in those 2 weeks that Walt decided he was going to become a cartoonist, which was pretty darn amazing at that time because there were really no jobs for cartoonists. There was no animation. There was even comic strips were just beginning. If you told someone you were going to be a cartoonist, you were going to be an editorial cartoonist, and most newspapers already had editorial cartoonists, and they were going to keep doing that till they dropped dead. And Walt's father was angry. You should be working in a jelly factory. You should, none of this is going to be bringing in any money or whatever. But as bad as Elias is sometimes described, he did have a good heart. And so on Saturday mornings, once Walt's leg healed, he allowed Walt to go to Kansas City Art Academy in the morning for an hour class on art to do that. And then when they moved a year later to Chicago to continue those classes with a Chicago editorial cartoonist by the name of Leroy Gossett. And it was then, in that first year of high school, that Walt, of course, forged his birth certificate, changing 1901 that he was born into 1900 so that he could join the Red Cross Ambulance Corps and go overseas to France. And then when he came back, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was going to be a cartoonist. He had made that decision at the age of 13, and that was the vision that was going to propel him for the rest of his life. So one of the reasons I've told you this story is my parents always taught me to be very careful about buying gifts for people. Not just to buy a gift for the sense of buying a gift, but to look at that person and understand who that person is and what they're really interested in, and you select the gift based on that. And so today, when you're out there in that vendor's room and you're buying a gift for yourself, or somebody's bought a gift for you, or you're buying a gift for someone else, take a look at that gift very carefully, because that may be the one gift that transforms your life, just as it did Walt Disney. Thank you for letting me share that story.